when we were talking about, should we develop this technology or should we stay away from it? Or is this technology going to come one way or another?
That's probably the most terrifying idea, I think, with technology. Like at what point does society get too far and think, oh, we can improve it just a little bit more?
We can understand how your sleep is changing over time and doing it just off a very small device. Welcome to IDUN Technologies and our monthly podcast. My name is Mark Melnikovich. I'm product lead and application developer by IDUN, where we are creating the Internet of Humans. And we're doing this by creating a very highly ubiquitous brain-computer interface by packaging tons of technology into earbuds. And we believe in this way we can bring neuroscience and neurotechnology to the masses, to everyone in the world. And I'm joined today by our marketing scientist, Sam. Welcome, Sam.
Hello, nice to be here.
It's a pleasure. I'm going to probably modify my accent to sound a little bit more posh since you're here.
Wow.
But today we have sort of a very interesting topic. We're going to be talking about brain-computer interfaces in popular culture, how things like science fiction, the things we imagine decades before they come into society, are shaping or not shaping how scientists and engineers develop the amazing magical technologies that we eventually take for granted every day, like smartphones and wearable sensors, TV. How do we come to this topic? Actually, how did you come to IDUN?
Well, that's quite an interesting story. If you hadn't guessed by my accent, I'm originally from England. And I moved to Switzerland for love. And my partner actually studied with Simon and Severin. And when a job came up as marketing scientist, because everybody here is a scientist, I decided to apply and came in that way. The joke is that I have very little scientific background. My entire knowledge with science comes from watching TV and film. Which is sort of the reason why I thought this would be a really cool topic to talk about today.
And since we have so many scientists and engineers, bringing in more designers and non-scientists is actually a very nice growth path for the company. That also helps us to contextualize how our inventions, our brain-computer interfaces, can actually be reflected in society or accepted or rejected because some people might think that they're too intrusive or creepy. How do you think science fiction really fits into this whole concept where we go from this idea that we can measure something in the laboratory about the brain, can bring it into a product which is actually capturing or trying to capture one of the most intimate electrical signals or things that we can use to characterize a person, like what's happening inside our brain. We feel like this is always related to our consciousness, to our most closely held entity that makes us who we are, individuals, humans, separating us from other creatures in the world.
Well, I think it goes back to what you were saying about popular culture sort of helping to shape the future of science, and whether that actually is a help or whether it's actually a hindrance or anything like that. So if we take an example of a future technology that was in a film decades before it was available, was iPads in 1968 in the film 2001, Space Odyssey. And then that was then taken to the next phase in the next generation with Captain Picard. So I think it's sort of like imagining what we could do if we had unlimited access to the brain. We understood absolutely everything that's happening in there, which is far from possible at the moment. We're getting there, but it's then trying to figure out what we would do with it as a society and what we could do with it at an individual level.
And what role do you think science fiction really plays in this dialogue when we're talking about, should we develop this technology or should we stay away from it? Or is this technology going to come one way or another and we take over the responsibility of developing it in the most ethical way so that we're not creating monsters or technology, let's say jails, where we're actually holding ourselves prisoner.
Yeah, so I think it's a good way to explore the sort of limitations and where we should draw those limitations.
What's the scariest science fiction film
Ooh,
you've ever experienced?
interesting question. See, it'd probably be Alien, but that doesn't have anything particularly to do with the technology that's being used. But I was always scared of the Borg, for example, when I was growing up. I was a huge Trekkie as a child.
You didn't want to be assimilated?
No, I definitely don't want to be assimilated. All about that individual freedoms and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, that's probably the most terrifying idea, I think, with technology. Like at what point does society get too far and think, oh, we can improve it just a little bit more and just a little bit more, and then we aim for that perfection that the Borg are constantly aiming for.
But what's so scary about the Borg? I mean, the idea isn't. I mean, on one hand, you're losing what individual. What do you lose when you become a Borg? Just to recap, the Borg are a android life form.
So, yeah, so
As part of Star Trek.
yeah, I would say so. Like the cyborg super species. So they were originally a flesh and blood society and species, but then they were trying to pursue perfection, and they did this through the integration of technology into their bodies, and then eventually that spawned into the hive mind, where they have a queen, and the rest of the Borg sort of follow her as drones. So as soon as you become a drone, you lose all free will. You just become this very small part into this massive whole. They have literally billions of individuals as part of this whole now in the hive, and they come from various different species and backgrounds and all these sorts of different things. So you very much lose the individual sort of free will, but then the heritage, the culture, the history, whilst the knowledge is taken and then shared with the rest of the hive, it's that sort of the ineffable parts of society that get lost, rather than just the tangible, oh, we can do this technology, we can do this with this technology. That's saved, but the individual freedom and the sort of culture side of things is completely erased.
That was part of the evolution of the Borg, or is that something that was designed into their code from the beginning, do you think?
I think it's a bit of both. I think they evolved. I'm not entirely sure on the full lore and background of the Borg, but I very much have a feeling that it's a society that moved towards trying to seek this perfection, and then it's sort of, they opened up Pandora's box and they lost control, and this drive and this desire came from the machine part that they'd integrated into their society, and then it took over. So I would say it's very much that sort of, it was the next step in their evolution, but they did not control it enough to be able to draw a line somewhere before they were completely absorbed by it.
And oftentimes, I mean, I feel like a lot of science fiction are about warnings for things that could go wrong in the future. Artificial intelligence and the Terminator. When I started getting into a bit of AI programming, how does a self-driving car work? How can I program this to learn in a certain environment? My conclusion was that if you teach AI empathy, then it's perfect, because they will be able to learn that empathy over a shorter amount of time than a human would, because a human you might be born with some empathy, you might have to learn it through interactions as a child. I mean, literally, that could take like a decade, at least.
Oh, absolutely.
And if you build an empathy model, you can just transfer it to a new person.
You see, I feel like there's a difficulty in that, because defining empathy itself and then the moral compass that you want to use.
Yeah, of course. It all depends on how it's trained.
Absolutely. But then coming from a person who has grown up in the US, for example, your moral background might be very different from someone who was born in an entirely different culture in an entirely different society. So I think that sort of training model to define empathy in an AI is very difficult. I mean, it comes back to Isaac Asimov tried to do it with the 3 laws of robotics, for example. And I feel like they're actually being taken now by AI engineers and stuff like that as the basis for a lot of the computing that's going on. So I think that's again another example of popular culture sort of influencing the scientific and engineer side of things. But again, it's like, who decides what's morally right? That's always the difficult part when it comes to the actual, for example, coming up with an empathy model. What is an empathetic behavior?
Good question.
It's very philosophical already. I feel like I've taken us off the rails, but there we go.
Well, but these are the big conversations that were happening also in Star Trek. I know that when I watch some popular media on YouTube, I see there's some people who appreciate the more philosophical Star Trek episodes, and some that appreciate the more action-packed J.J. Abrams influenced narratives.
I suppose it comes down to sort of what is the prime directive, for example, if we're going to go for a Star Trek themed approach to BCIs or to AI, what would be the one thing that we try not to do as much as possible? But then again, there's not exactly great examples of sticking to the prime directive in any Star Trek series, because Captain Kirk was all over the place with it. Janeway was all over the place with it.
Janeway.
Yeah. Everybody's favorite captain. See, I really like Voyager. I think it's one of my favorites. It's up there. It's sort of above Deep Space Nine for me. But Patrick Stewart, after series 2 of The Next Generation, because the first 2 series are a little bit problematic, and then it starts to get into its stride. So that's where I would.
As happens with many TV shows, and also with BCI companies coming into our stride. I mean, first you say, okay, can we measure something in the brain? I say yes. And at IDUN, the question was, what can we measure inside the ear? Because then we can make a very easy to use BCI. And now we're moving into the phase where we're saying, okay, we can measure something. We can measure it reliably. We can understand how your sleep is changing over time, and doing it just with a very small device as opposed to a large cap. There's a lot of implications for society when we integrate this tech into earbuds, because it means people won't know you're wearing a brain-computer interface. You won't know it yourself. It'll be as normal as wearing any other earbud system. We've seen in the past things like Google Glass. You put on new tech, people don't understand what context it has in society or should have. And then there can be some people who are loving and accepting of it, and some that really reject it. So that's one of the growth questions we're now being presented with. How do we bring neurotech into society, and what use cases are they acceptable? What use cases are scary, or what we might call the dark side of neurotechnology? And these are questions that we're discussing right now. So it's interesting to think about frameworks that we can create right now to also help our guidance and governance towards developing them.
Yeah, absolutely. Something we're working on at the moment actually is putting together a sort of a neuroethics charter for IDUN to make sure that when we do eventually create something that is hopefully ubiquitous and it's throughout society, and then let it free for other people to play with and for other people to explore the use cases and stuff like that, we end up in a situation where we can say, right, this is the line that we would draw with that. This is the line that we want to make sure that other people don't go past. Who are we going to allow access to whatever we create, and what sort of rules do we want to have in place to make sure that we don't open Pandora's box and we don't end up like the Borg, which is obviously a very exaggerated example, but still.
I mean, let's be honest, I'm sure some people would be happy being in the Borg.
Yeah, that's very true. Absolutely. Just don't have to think about anything people tell you.
Well, what do you think about bees?
Bees?
Would you be happy to be a bee?
I'm not sure, to be honest. That's the true philosophical question today. So would you be happy being a bee? Mm-hmm.
Or an ant? I mean, you know what to do. You're doing your thing.
You got 10 times the strength as to body mass or something as an ant. You're very, very strong compared to the size.
Yeah, seriously. It's very cool.
Yeah, all comes with trade-offs, I guess. But no, with BCIs, there's always this sort of worry that it could go too far and we're going to end up in a situation like, I don't know, Cybermen in Doctor Who, or The Matrix with the Matrix itself, where we're plugged into a computer and that's it for the rest of our lives, basically. We're just farmed.
What scares you about The Matrix?
Well, it's losing that sort of free will and then questioning what is real. So there's very much I can't remember who discussed it originally, but it's sort of the question of, if the Matrix is possible, how do we know we're not already there?
Are we in a simulation? But you always, I mean, life is about the freedom that we have, that we think we have, the control, the environment, the society that we grow up in obviously puts specific barriers, whether they're imagined or real or learned. I'm thinking back to this. Apparently, maybe it was only an internet meme. I heard a story that you would bring some monkeys into a cube. They would bring down a banana. They would like punish them sometimes when the banana was coming down, and then they would remove them. Anyway, the point is that they would learn to govern themselves and to also attack one another based on the rewards that they were given. So you're basically engineering barriers in society that wouldn't have to be there.
Yeah, it's social conditioning basically, and that's something that we've definitely built in our society these days. We've got some social conditioning. But interestingly, speaking about monkeys and apes and stuff like that, there was recently they've discovered that there's a small society of apes who have developed their own religion. And they've defined this religion by doing a ritual on a specific time of day or a specific day of the week. So that their ritual is they will go to a specific tree in the rainforest and they will throw rocks at it. And it serves no purpose other than the fact that they're throwing rocks at this tree. But they've defined this as sort of a religious practice. And that's not something that has necessarily been put on them by an outside source. It's something that they've developed themselves. Maybe one day there was thunder and lightning and then they threw a rock at this tree and then all of a sudden the storm was over, and now they're decided that, right, okay, if we keep throwing this rock at this tree, then the thunder and lightning will stay away. But these sorts of practices develop over time. We've developed them over the history of our own society. And
so religion is inevitable?
Potentially. Well, I feel like we always need to have something to give us those boundaries.
So do you think we develop boundaries because we need them in life?
I think so. I think it's a good way of protecting others around us, because I think we are innately empathetic, going back to the empathy discussion. So I think there is some positive aspects to those sorts of practices and those sorts of boundaries, so that we end up in a situation where society is protected. If we look at, I'm going to bring up Nietzsche, classic literature student right now. Sort of like the genealogy of morality, sorry. He wrote a piece about how morality changes depending on the perspective of the society at the time. So you end up in a situation where, say, if religion is the moral compass, that can end up in a situation where religious society becomes so powerful, it becomes the thing that everybody should aspire to, and then eventually they end up abusing their power, and then it's actually the opposite of that becomes the aspiration. So instead of being a lord or lady of the court, and that's the aspiration of society to be that person, it's then actually being the pauper or being the poor person who's suffering through life, which is actually the thing that you should be aiming for. And eventually it's going to end up swapping between those two things, and it's this constant cycle that Nietzsche describes in society when it comes to the moral compass that we have. And religious practices are a way to either guide that or to follow it as an individual, if you want to have a following role or a guiding role. But that comes back to what we need to do when it comes to opening this new Pandora's box of BCI technology. We need to make sure that there's someone saying, right, this is our moral compass. It's something that we can work with others to make sure that it fits for their society, their culture, their uses. But it needs to very much say, right, this is a new technology. This is a new frontier, as it were, if we're going back to Star Trek as well.
Brain, the final frontier.
Absolutely. Yeah, so we need to say, right, okay, what is our prime directive? What are our 3 rules? What's our moral compass for it? And I'm really glad that I can be in a situation where I'm helping to mold that as part of a company. I very much want to get really involved with the neuroethics here, and I think that's why it's important to have, as you were saying earlier, the creatives in the room. Because if you have a set of scientists and engineers, they're saying, well, this is the possibilities that we can do, so why not do it? And they'll just do it because they're like, well, we can do it, so let's use it.
Yeah, we like to push the boundaries.
And that's a great thing about science and a great thing about engineering, where you can push those boundaries, but I think there needs to be someone that thinks outside that box, outside that very sort of tunnel vision of we can do it, so why not? It's sort of like putting those boundaries in place and saying, well, no, if we do that, that could lead to this, this, and this. And it's making an informed decision about where we want to take this technology so that we don't end up in a situation where society collapses because we can read each other's minds.
Is that your biggest fear?
No, I have very, very little to hide when it comes to my thoughts. It's very inane a lot of the time. It's mostly just sort of like, well, I'm hungry, so, you know. If people want to know that, they feel free to read my mind.
Yeah, I mean, that's also why I'm very happy that you joined the team, to also balance out these different conversations that we're having. So how do you think, so some of our next steps are going to be establishing, I mean, we've already been doing it over the past couple of half year, developing our neuroethics board. We're talking a little bit about some of the fears. What do you think is some of the best things that will come out of neurotechnology, despite all the warnings from science fiction?
Well, I think it's going to open up a new situation for us to be able to interact with the world around us. I think it's going to help things like it's going to enable us to go past our own physical boundaries, whether that's through a physical disability or something like that, and we can end up in a situation where life becomes a lot easier. Once you take care of the very basic things, it allows humanity to then look at the things that is more expressive or a little bit more difficult to do. Once you've taken care of the bare essentials, then you can really step up as to what you want to do in the future. For me, it's very exciting to think about, okay, well, if we've taken care of the time that it takes to, say, make a cup of coffee, because we just think, oh, I'd like a coffee, and a machine turns on and it says, well, there's your coffee and it's made, instead of just like setting a timer the night before, for example. Yeah. I think that it enables us to have a little bit more time to think about other things, and whether that's whatever pursuit we want it to be, whether it's painting, whether it's engineering, whether it's music writing or philosophy or anything like that. I think it's going to give us a lot more time to pursue things hopefully in a healthy way. Obviously, some people are free to do with whatever they want to do with their time. But I think that's the really exciting thing for me, which probably makes me sound very lazy because I don't want to make myself a cup of coffee.
Yeah, but I think managing intent and desire, I mean, because when we have to consciously think about all these things we want to do or have to do, that's where our time goes. I mean, scientists originally, these were people who just had a lot of money and had time who didn't have to take care of themselves every day. It opens up time to then taste acids and bases and understand things about the world that you wouldn't have time to even consider questioning without bringing down that boundary. So we're a menagerie of boundaries and freedoms, and neurotechnology is going to hopefully bring a slight paradigm shift in how we interact with the world.
Absolutely, yeah, that's what I think. So I think it's already, we can see with the invention of the smartphone, we've got a lot more productivity out of people. Whether it's productivity in the right direction is an entirely different conversation, whether that's actually healthy for the individual, because if you're working 24/7, then you end up not living 24/7. So I think it is the next step when it comes to the technology. It could be the next sort of iPhone moment where this entirely new technology is there and available for us and it becomes so natural to the way that society functions. Because especially with earbuds, everybody I know has already got a pair of earbuds at least. So if the form factor is already there, if we can get that technology there as well, then it's going to automatically be something that we can use and understand and be integrated in society without this huge learning curve. Yeah. And I think that's really cool.
I think so as well. So thank you very much for joining us on our latest podcast, delving into the past, the future, science fiction, brain-computer interfaces, marketing science. Thank you very much, Sam, for joining me on this conversation and this journey in the company. At IDUN, we are bringing out our next phase of our product later this year, the Guardian 2.0. It'll be more ubiquitous, a more seamless integration between the brain and the internet. And if you'd like to learn more about this, to join us on this journey, follow us. You don't have to like this video, but feel free to if you'd like to. We're also going to different conferences, and we're very interested in having more conversations about the future of neurotechnology. So please get in contact, start a conversation. We'd love to hear from you. Otherwise, till next time, thank you very much. Adieu. Grüezi miteinander. Bis nächstes Mal. See you soon.
Tschüssi.